What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for MLB Playoffs Thursday, October 15th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, MLB Playoffs. Let's take a look at this 2-game main slate. So I wanted to get this video out early, but the Houston and Tampa Bay Rays game, they haven't posted the probable pitchers yet. So I'm going to give you mostly a Dodgers stack here. Our Dodgers stack crushed it last night. So I hope you guys were on that Dodgers stack. And they're in a pretty good spot here again tonight for another stack. So let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Clayton Kershaw pitching against the Atlanta Braves. Clayton Kershaw is only giving up a .643 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 6 righties here tonight. On top of that, the Braves have only hit 18 of his last 91 pitches. That's a 198 batting average, and he's $10,100 FanDuel salary and $700 less on DraftKings. He's averaging 38 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 37, 18, and 46 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He has an ERA of 2.16. His record is 6-2 on the season, pitching an average of 89 pitches per game. He's projected at 32.1 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Clayton Kershaw here versus the Atlanta Braves. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher position. I like Will Smith with an 11% batting advantage over Bryce Wilson. Will Smith bats 25% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a 1.024 OPS versus righties. And Bryce Wilson, he's giving up a .856 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Wilson yet, and he's $3,100 FanDuel salary and $1,700 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. He's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 16, 6, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Will Smith here versus Bryce Wilson. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. This is probably a FanDuel play for me only. He's just way underpriced on FanDuel. So I like Chris Taylor batting against Bryce Wilson. Chris Taylor bats 5% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .818 OPS versus righties. And Bryce Wilson, he's giving up a .856 OPS versus righties. He's only $2,700 FanDuel salary, and he's $1,800 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. He's averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Chris Taylor here versus Bryce Wilson. So I'll probably play Chris Taylor on FanDuel, but if you're playing on DraftKings, I'd probably go with Jose Altuve. We're not sure who the pitcher is for Tampa Bay Rays yet, but Altuve is batting a .779 OPS versus lefties and a .761 OPS versus righties. So he bats pretty much the same versus lefty and righties, and he's been on fire, scoring 28, 25, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season, and projected at 13.8 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Jose Altuve here versus the Tampa Bay Rays. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Justin Turner batting against Bryce Wilson. Justin Turner bats 4% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .872 OPS versus righties. And we know Bryce Wilson is giving up a .856 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Wilson yet, and Turner is $3,100 FanDuel salary and $2,000 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. He's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, scoring 12, 3, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 10.7 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Justin Turner here versus Bryce Wilson. Now, if you're playing on DraftKings, you may want to take a look at Alex Bregman, especially if it's going to be a lefty pitcher here tonight. He's batting a .1085 OPS versus lefties and a .816 OPS versus righties. He's averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's only scored 6, 0, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think he's due for a big game here. He's projected at 13.4 fantasy points here tonight. He's $3,800 FanDuel salary and only $600 more on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. So I like Alex Bregman here versus the Tampa Bay Rays.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks.
Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I'll give you 2 plays here. If you're going to spend up at the shortstop position, take a look at Corey Seager with a 33% batting advantage over Bryce Wilson. Corey Seager is batting 18% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .934 OPS versus righties. And Bryce Wilson is giving up a 1.006 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Wilson yet, and Seager is $4,100 FanDuel salary and $900 more on DraftKings. He's averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 41, 41, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight. He had a couple of huge games, and he's in a great spot here tonight. So I like Corey Seager here versus Bryce Wilson. Now, if you can't spend up at the shortstop position, this guy's been playing pretty well. And even though we don't know who the pitcher is yet for the Houston Astros, take a look at Willie Adames. He's batting a .784 OPS versus lefties and a .787 OPS versus righties. So he bats pretty much the same to both hands, and he's averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 7, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's projected at 12.4 fantasy points here tonight, and he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary and $1,100 more on DraftKings. So I think he's a decent play here to give your lineup some salary relief. So I like Willie Adames here versus the Houston Astros. Okay, let's take a look at the outfield position. Another spend up option for you. He's in a great spot here tonight. I like Cody Bellinger with a 29% batting advantage over Bryce Wilson. Cody Bellinger is batting 14% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .958 OPS versus righties. And Bryce Wilson, he's giving up a 1.006 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Wilson yet, and he's $4,300 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. Averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, he scored 34, 13, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Cody Bellinger here versus Bryce Wilson. And then we picked this guy as a value play yesterday, and man, this guy worked out. He killed it. I'm going to go with him again tonight because his splits are good. His salary is still low, so he's going to give you some salary relief and complete that Dodgers stack. So I like Jock Peterson with a 37% batting advantage over Bryce Wilson. Jock Peterson bats 23% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .799 OPS versus righties. And Bryce Wilson throws 15% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a 1.006 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Wilson yet, but Jock Peterson is only $2,700 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. He's averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 35, 9, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games, projected at 9.6 fantasy points here tonight. So I like Jock Peterson and this Los Angeles Dodgers stack here versus Bryce Wilson.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this MLB slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.